Oh, come on now, let's settle down. Why don't we do an after-lunch serenity prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the courage and the wisdom to know the difference. So this is a little bit more of a discussion on the family's reaction to the disease of alcoholism and addiction. And recovery takes time. And if you love an alcoholic, if you love an addict, you will experience a lot of losses. Relationships are ended. Hearts are broken. Opportunities are squandered. Chances are not responded to. There's a lot of grief and loss in any family with addicts and alcoholics. So much promise gets wasted. And so I want to talk a few moments about grief and loss as part of recovery. In the last hour, I mentioned Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, when I was a bright young person, had a lot to say about the subject. Her very important book on death and dying by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And like a lot of us, she had a hard life. Grew up in Switzerland. Was it one of triplets? She was a triplet? Is that what we say? And her home life was impossible. And it's the end of the Second War, and she wants to get out of home. And so her first job at the age of 16 or 17 is she hooks up with the United Nations Children's Relief Group, who were going into the concentration camps looking for children who were still alive. So that was her introduction to care and caring for people. And she carried that her entire life. She had a whole series of conversations with loss and death and grief, and worked lots with children and with parents. And she had a lot to say. And she does say that everyone gets to die. I need to remember that sometimes. I was talking to a fellow in the Midwest on a retreat. He was a sober alcoholic, very, very upset about something. So I said, well, let's talk. And he was about 86 years old. And I said, so what's up? And he said, well, I was in my 60s. I had cancer, and I did chemo and all those things, and the cancer went away, and now it's back. And I said, you know, we all get to die, right? And he said, I hate that part. I said, let's talk about that part, you know. This is a natural process. It's a natural process. And if you're in recovery and you're used to doing the third step on a daily basis, it's kind of like a third step. You know, turning your will and your life over to the care of your higher power. So Dr. Kubler-Ross, talking about death and dying, talks about things that we just don't like talking about at all. We don't have words for that. As Americans, if you're having a feeling, we prefer a pill. Sedate yourself, don't feel those things. And I identify with that because I do prefer sedation. I love comatose. No feelings, no thoughts, heaven. And I loved alcohol on a daily basis, and I loved marijuana, which is such a nice drug. And of all the years that I smoked, have a couple of beers and maybe a little brandy and a little dope. Now, please don't repeat this because this is shame. I never learned how to roll a joint. Shame. I had friends who could do it with one hand, and I admired them. But I don't have the dexterity, I don't have the skill, so I smoked using a corncob pipe like Douglas MacArthur, and I thought that was much more patriotic, so that's what I did for a long time. But to be sedated, to be shut down, to just be shut down is wonderful for me. And I'm off booze and I'm off marijuana. I never did pills. I think I could. I remember seeing a therapist, Dr. Arthur Solomon. I think Catholic priests should see Jewish therapists. I think they're not impressed, so that's very important. And I wanted to get a Valium prescription from him. All my friends were using Valium, and they seemed much calmer than I was. So I was drinking, but jumpy. And I saw Dr. Solomon for a couple of weeks, and I said, "Doctor, can I get a Valium prescription from you?" And he said, "No." No, I didn't know they could do that. I didn't know that the therapist could. And I said, "Why won't you give me a Valium prescription?" And he said, "Because you'd abuse it." And I said, "Well, exactly. I'm looking forward to abusing this." So I never got a Valium prescription. I have taken Valium, but from friends, and one or two or three gave it to me, and I stole it a couple of times, but not a lot, but a couple of times. And my basic problem with Valium is this: it takes 20 minutes. Who has that kind of time? The nice thing about alcohol is it's instant. I mean, instantly it's better. I remember I was teaching one day and the kids were just awful, as only roomfuls of teenagers can be. Awful, awful behavior, bad smells. Ugh. And every class was awful. Other teachers were a nightmare. The administration were all war criminals. I just hated them all. And I went back to the Jesuit house, and it was about 5 o'clock, and I got a water glass, and I threw some ice in there, and I filled it up with bourbon or vodka or gin. I use all of them. And I remember draining it in about 3 gulps, and I was instantly better. Well, let's do that again, if one is good. Feel that, and then drained it, just gulped it down. Oh, I could breathe for the first time all day. And then number 3, you can sip, but the evening has begun. So I like that. So I'm in treatment, 3-week program in Berkeley. Haven't had anything for 10 days, 2 weeks. Suddenly my arms and my legs began tingling quickly, violently, like the blood had been cut off, and I jumped up, and I said, "My arms and my legs are coming off." And the nurse, there's always a nurse in the group, she said, "That's called sensation." And it's really good when it comes back. But for those of us who like to be sedated, I want to talk a little bit about the grief stuff. Because this is what happens, and there are books written on the subject. Sometimes, and you experience grief whenever there's loss or change or death. Some griefs are major and some are minor. We know some things about them. We've studied them. We've talked to people who grieve. And here's what happens a lot of times. Say there's the death of a friend or the death of a parent or the loss of a job, or your best friend moves across country. All of those are big losses. For a while, you might feel numb. You feel nothing. Shock. And then you might feel angry. And then you might feel sad. And then you might feel like you're going crazy. And your memory, you can't remember anything. You can't find your keys. Short-term memory just seems completely gone. And then there's tears. And then there's rage. And then you just think you're going crazy again. That's called grief. And a major loss is a 3 to 5 year process. As a norm, 3 to 5 years. And say your mom died and the first Christmas wasn't so bad. The second Christmas almost killed you. Third one, not so bad. Fourth Christmas, awful. And then it gets a little better. It comes in waves. You also need to know grief comes in waves. And sometimes we're just in the wave, we're in the surf, and we're just surrounded by it, and there just doesn't seem to be an end to it. And then it abates, and things are really, really peaceful and calm for a day or two, and then it comes back, a great big wave. And then maybe weeks pass, and it's not so bad, and then you have a bad day, and it comes in waves. Also this, every loss is connected to every other loss. The story is told of out in the Midwest. Gunsmoke was one of my favorite shows when I was a kid, and Gunsmoke takes place in Dodge City, Kansas. You know, the Wild West, Dodge City, Kansas. And anyway, settlers are going across the country, and they're attacked by bandits or somebody, and a lot of people are killed off, and the farm is burned down, and the family is all left for dead, and mom comes to, and she sees her husband and kids are all dead, and she just gets up and she buries everyone. That's what you have to do. You've got to do what's in front of you. And then she goes into the barn and sees the cows dead, and she breaks down and cries and cries and cries for the cow. She's not crying for the cow. It's all of these are connected. Your dad dies, your best friend moves across country, a couple other things happen, someone else dies. You handle this really well. You're strong, you're brave. You're so good, you're so strong. I admire you so much. You come home and you find the canary is dead, and you break down and cry for the next 3 days. And you say, I must be crazy, crying for the canary. You're not crying for the canary. Well, you are, but all the losses. And grief has its own logic and its own reason. I have a suspicion that some people who are angry all the time about everything are locked in grief. They just don't know how to get out of it because there's been a lot of losses. So I need to ask God, as I understand God, on a regular basis to help me walk through the grief and not to be so angry all the time at the addict or the alcoholic. I have to remember this is a disease. And if I'm going to be angry, I want to focus not on the people who are afflicted with it, but perhaps the disease. And what can I do with the anger? I don't think it's a bad thing to be mad. Anger gives me energy. When I'm angry enough, I can even vacuum. Laundry gets done if I'm mad enough, you know. And until then, we just kind of wait for it. Oh, come on, Tom, get mad. Yard work. What do you do with anger? Well, I have never been able to pray it away. It's a physical energy, and I need to do something with it. So I can clean, I can chop, I can dig, I can plant, I can cut things back. I remember when 9/11 happened on the West Coast, I was just waking up and we heard about the first tower and 6 o'clock in the morning and went downstairs and turned the TV on. The second tower was hit. And I remember that day feeling nothing but confusion. Confusion, I didn't know what was going on, upset, nothing was clear. We got a little bit of clarity within a day or two or three. These were attacks by people who wished us ill. And I had nothing but emotion in me, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I thought, I'm going to go outside and do yard work. And there were things to cut back and things to dig up. And I remember turning on one of the talk show hosts, who's always angry all the time whenever he's on. So I listened to him for a while, and that helped me. And as I was digging around the front of the house, I noticed there was a rose bush, a rose tree that had not flourished in years, although I had talked to it and tried to encourage it. It still wasn't flourishing, and I remember yanking it out and leaving it there as a warning to the others. You know, I was mad. So I don't have to, what I want to do with the anger when it comes up about alcoholism or addiction or loss, I don't want to hurt myself and I don't want to hurt anybody else. So I need to find some ways of channeling that energy. And when the sadness comes, being able to channel the energy. And tears sometimes means that healing's going on. Healing's going on. I was afraid for a while that if I started crying, I'd never stop. Or if I started laughing, I'd never stop. Yes, you will. Yes, you will. Writing can help. Having some other people to talk to can help. A grief group can be very, very helpful. And one of the Al-Anon texts is just about loss, talking about our losses. And there's lots of them. How Al-Anon works for families and friends of alcoholics. This is from the text. We know we've tried lots of things that didn't work. We may have poured out liquor, hidden money that might pay for it, even taken a few drinks ourselves in order to leave less for the alcoholic. That's very smart. Or to feel more a part of their lives. That's very subtle. We're drinking, we're close, you know. Most of us have argued, pleaded, bargained, threatened, walked out, come back, given ultimatums, failed to carry them out, or carried them out and felt guilty. We've tried to reason with the drinkers. How'd that go for you? My mom was a great believer in repetition. If she just repeated it one more time, we'd get it. One of my friends, who's Stephanie from Texas, she said she suffered from a need to over-explain. See, if I just explain this to you one more time using smaller words, you'd agree with me. And that's just a waste of time and breath. Most of us have argued, pleaded, threatened, bargained, walked out, come back, given ultimatums, failed to carry them out, or carried them out and felt guilty. We've tried to reason with the drinkers, scheduled their free time, monitored their behavior. We've complained, we've prayed. We've tried to avoid doing anything that might cause the alcoholic to drink. We've searched for opportunities to make the drinker see how destructive drinking can be. Mostly we've hurt and we've worried. Now, I want to say a few words about worry. It's very helpful to get your worry done early in the day. Rather than spreading it out through the day, just set a few moments aside in the morning and focus your worry and get it done then. And some of us think that worry is a spiritual exercise. If I worry enough, I'm connected to you. If I'm worried enough, we're intimate. If I'm worried enough, we're friends. If I'm so worried about you that I cannot sleep or eat, we must be very close. The story of my mom's life. She was sure that as long as she worried, her children would not fly off the planet Earth. And I'm a worrier. I think I'm doing something. Let me worry about this. In fact, every so often, this is in the last 5 years, some stuff has come up. I have been so worried, I was unable to sleep and I got sick. So worried. So to those of us who worry, I'd like to mention the 3 C's. About alcoholism, drug addiction. I can't control it. I didn't cause it. And I can't cure it. And as an older person, I have less and less energy to waste. I prefer not to worry at all. But I can and I do. One of my friends phrased it this way: he only worries one day at a time. He doesn't worry about the next 20 years. He only worries about today. His worry is focused. And we put a little corollary on that, and we said we've learned to dread one day at a time. Don't dread the next 90 years. Just dread today. There's enough in today to upset you and keep you miserable. Focus on that. Focus on that. God has given each one of us an emotional, a psychological, a spiritual acre. In my recovery, I want to take care of my own acre. There are some things I can do about my behavior and my attitudes and my thinking. I want to take care of that. And there's so much I can't do anything about at all. One of the things I do in my own neighborhood is I regularly, not every day, because that would be obsessive, but regularly I go out and clean up the neighborhood. I take a paper bag and I pick up trash and bottles especially, and my street. For a while I was cleaning up 6 or 7 streets, but that's too much. Clean my own street. And one morning I was walking up and down and there was a little pile of crap, some McDonald's hamburger wrappers, a 6-pack of beer, and a condom, all used. And I wrote one of my friends in Marin County, which is known for elegance, and I said, some of your little friends came over here last night and had a party on my street. I wish you'd tell your Marin County people to stay home. And I said, hamburgers, beer cans, condom. And she wrote back and said, it was a great party and we had a great time. Humor helps. But I got to clean that up. But I don't go there 6 times a day, and I don't go 10 blocks out of the way, but there are some simple things I can do in my own immediate area that make a difference. I get to set the tone. I get to set the pace. I mentioned a few of the Al-Anon slogans like don't take the bait, live and let live. Day at a time, dreading one day at a time, looking forward to a day at a time, battling one day at a time. Another one I found very useful is the one that says, I'll be right back. Sometimes things explode and we're present, and sometimes we're asked to take action right away. Count to 10, take a break. It's very, very smart. One of the guys in my house is an anti-war activist, gets arrested a lot of times for anti-war activity. Military father, alcoholic mother, makes perfect sense. And he was having a meltdown, and we give him recycling. He's in charge of recycling because he does it perfectly. And one night he came in and he told me, angry, he said, "It's taken me 7 hours to get the recycling right." And I said to him, "Good for you." You know, he wanted me to apologize and swear we'd try harder, but that's not going to happen. So you're crazy, stick with it. We're glad for you. But on one of his occasions, he was just having a meltdown. I mean, he gets in his own way. He gets so frustrated, and all these things go wrong, and he imploded. And I had enough Al-Anon to know that I should leave him alone for a while. I'll be right back. And the next day, we could have a conversation and deal with what needed to be dealt with, rather than saying, "Let's deal with this now while everyone has a gun." No, that's not. Let's wait a while. Let's wait a while. I'll be right back. A few years ago, I helped out with elections and stuff and set the precinct up and bring all the stuff and make sure voters can vote. That's an important part of everything. And it was mid-afternoon, and I'd been there since 6 in the morning, and a lady came in, and she was not having a good day. I don't think she was having a good day for several years. She was very angry about a lot of stuff and didn't like this and didn't like that. And she met me coming in, and she kind of snarled at me because I was in her way. And she has to do some stuff to sign in and stuff as a voter. But she was snarling. And I said to her, "I'll be right back." And I stepped aside, and I got a glass of orange juice, and I drank a glass of orange juice, and I did a couple of deep breaths and calmed down and went back and made sure that she got her ballot and she can vote. Act. Don't react. Act. Don't react. Let it begin with me. Last slogan. Let it begin with me. One of the problems I have is I think you should shape up. If only members of my family would shape up. If only the people over there shaped up. And as long as I'm in that place, I'm in a very frustrated situation. I need to know that there are some things I can do to make a difference. They're usually very small and they're usually very practical. I was talking with my boss a few years ago, and I was unhappy. I had a long list of things I was unhappy about. And I told him I should be going to a lot more meetings. And he said to me, "How about one more a week?" Now, the genius of that response is this. When I should be going to a lot more meetings, I was not taking any action. But going to one more a week was something I could actually do. And it really did change the quality of my day and of my program. A lot of times what I need is not a major overhaul, I need fine-tuning. And sometimes the fine-tuning is in the smallest of things. 1 or 2 more meetings, a little bit longer quiet time, a little bit different meditation flavor throughout the day, and everything changes. More regular contact with my sponsor, everything changes. It is a perfectly good thing throughout the day to ask God for help. Do you do it once or do you do it regularly? The answer is yes. And sometimes asking God for help is as simple as saying, "Help." And I can be so busy sometimes I forget to do that. I forget to ask for help. I was flying across country. My plan was to get into San Francisco about 6 p.m., get my bag, get on public transportation, get home, and pay $5 for a cab ride home. But it was winter, and we were changing planes in Chicago, and the last public transportation leaves the airport at 11:40 in the evening. So if you miss that, it's a taxi cab ride and $100. So that's my issue. Well, I'm tired and I'm busy, and I get to the airport, and we leave somewhere here. Maybe it was Newark, ended up in Chicago, and storm and ice, and the 6 o'clock flight is delayed, and it becomes an 8:30 flight, and then a 10 o'clock flight, and then an 11 o'clock flight. And there's ice on the wings, and they're de-icing the plane, and I am in a fury because I don't want to spend the money for the taxi cab. And I'm angry at the stewardess, the flight attendant. What's wrong with you? Why isn't this plane leaving? People are stalling. People are delaying. What's wrong with these people? Are they stupid? This commentary is going on very loud. We finally land in San Francisco. I get off the plane. The baggage, of course, my bag is not coming off. My bag is not coming off. And it's 11:40, and the last car leaves the station. I am in a rage. And suddenly I realized I was crazy. And not once that day had I asked God for help. I've been busy. And I took a moment, and because of my Perfect Al-Anon program, I don't scream in public because it frightens children. But I went, little bit of aerobic exercise, asked God for help, knowing there was nothing I can do. My bag is going to be coming, and then the bag did come off, and now I need a taxi, and I had a moment of clarity. The taxi cab guy does not need me as a crazy person to drive to Oakland. So I calmed down and asked God for help and some guidance, and I went outside and I found a young fellow whose English wasn't his first language, and I said, "Could you take me to Oakland?" And he said yes. And we went, and I treated him like a human being and tipped him, because by now it's like almost 1 a.m., and he's got a family to take care of. And I got there, and the next morning I woke up completely exhausted from a very, very stressful day. It would have been less stressful if I had remembered to turn things over into God's good care shortly after we left Newark. But I can fight and argue and scream and have terrible chaos inside of myself. And what I need to do, and this is a slogan now, I think this is the last one of today, I need to remember to remember. I need to remember to ask for help. I need to remember to return phone calls. I need to remember to get to a meeting. I need to remember to eat. One of the people I've learned from is a person named Susan Anthony. And she's the grandniece of the Susan B. Anthony, one of the great figures of the late 19th, early 20th century. Votes for women, which I know is controversial, but I just want to say that was her cause. Susan B. Anthony. Anyway, her grandniece is Susan Anthony, and she got sober the year I was born. Did a lot of stuff, and she was giving a presentation. I got to hear her, and I got to drive her to the airport because I'm so very special. And we had a conversation, and Dr. Anthony said this: if you go to meetings, if you read the literature, if you go to 90 meetings in 90 days, you will learn everything you need to know about having a life that's productive and happy and well-balanced. She said, the problem isn't what I know. The problem is I don't remember what I know. Like, how often do you call your sponsor in a crisis and your sponsor says to you what your sponsor has said for the last 20 years? Oh, I forgot. Remember to use the tools of the program. Remember to sit down with the book. Remember to say hello to the newcomer and the old-timer, and to open the door and to clean up after. There's an argument you could have. Alcoholics are a lot like church people. They'll argue over almost anything. Are we recovered or recovering? And the answer is yes. In so many ways, we've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And in so many ways, there's so much more to do. That growth continues. To grasp and develop a manner of living, to ask God for help, to clean up our messes, to look at our own stuff, to try to be useful one day at a time. There's wonderful stories told of people trying to avoid alcoholism and avoid addiction and avoid alcoholics. One of my favorites is a woman named Joan. She's on the West Coast. Joan and Tom, they've been together over 60 years, and they're now in their 80s. But when Joan was a bright young thing, her dad was a mean drunk, and she was not going to marry an alcoholic, and that was not going to happen in her house. And so whenever she saw a young man who drank beer, she wouldn't even talk to him. They'd go to dances, and you dance with somebody and you do the Al-Anon sniff. You kind of sniff in to see if there's alcohol in the area. And if a boy drank, she wouldn't even give him the time of day. And then she met Tom, and Tom was really cute and fun. He still is, and he's 80 plus years old, but he's still cute and fun. And he didn't smell of booze. So they got married and started their family, and she found out the reason he didn't smell of booze is he was using heroin. And it just doesn't smell like beer. So that began a nightmare of 20 years of chaos for them. And he gets into recovery and she starts into Al-Anon. And she's now pretty blind and he's pretty deaf, so they're a perfect couple. But they've worked it out over the years of give and take and speak and listen and my turn and your turn. And there's a lot we can learn from those who've been doing this for a while. The gift we give each other is our experience, our strength, and our hope. That's the gift we give each other. And when someone shares experience, strength, and hope, when I can identify, I can learn a lot. One of our friends is a woman named Peggy. Peggy, again, is in her mid to late 80s. Peggy's from somewhere in Illinois, one of those Illinois places that prides itself on not being Chicago. You know, we aren't Chicago. We're much better. And Peggy, when she was ready for college, she runs away from home. She goes to California, goes to Stanford University, and that's pretty sophisticated and pretty high pressure and lots going on there. And Peggy was a country girl and a Midwestern girl and pretty simple and didn't really like alcohol. She met a guy named Joe. And she didn't like him that much, but he liked her, so they got married. Happens pretty regularly. And Joe introduced her to a more sophisticated life, fancier, more upscale, faster. And he introduced her to Martini World. And martinis are a kind of magical thing. I've long believed that the martini glass should win the Nobel Prize for geometry. I mean, it can just take your breath away. It's so beautiful. And there's a whole ritual to martinis. You just don't drink them. I mean, there's the glass and the vermouth and the olive and the vodka. There's a lot of stuff that goes into making a martini, rather like smoking a cigar. I'm not a cigar smoker, but I have friends. You just don't smoke a cigar. There's a lot that goes into smoking a cigar, including humidors and cutting and all sorts. It's exhausting. Anyway, Peggy gets into Martini World, and they have a couple of kids right away, and then there's a pause, and then they have a couple more kids, and it goes fun plus problems, and at the end, Peggy's very done and enters into recovery with a lot of children still at home. Peggy shared New Year's Eve a couple years ago on her progression of the disease. And she said, martinis, Martini World, chilled glasses, perfect glasses, olives, vermouth, vodka. She said, then I found out I didn't need the olive. And then I found out I didn't need the vermouth. And then I found out I didn't need the glass. That's almost haiku, you know, it's so perfectly done. Chaos, and then a long recovery begins. Not just for Peggy, but for her kids. Her husband wanted to move the girlfriend in. And Peggy thought that was a bad idea, so the marriage didn't survive. But Peggy did. And Peggy, who had children and grandchildren, many of whom share our disease. And so she's learned how to focus on the simplest things one day at a time to do that which is possible. God's will is a conversation. I asked my sponsor once, what is God's will? He was having a good day. You want to take advantage of your sponsors whenever they have a good day. And he said, it is God's will for each of us to have a life. Go get one. Some decisions and some projects and some work and some relationships and some joy. Have a life. So furthermore, what's God's will in having a life, in being people, in being human beings who are alive one day at a time? And this is what I look for, and this would be my last contribution for the day, but for those of us who get surrounded by chaos and upheaval, sometimes danger. What's God's will? And I look for this. Number one, I ask myself, what is simple? Number two, what's practical? And number three, what's possible? If something's simple and practical and possible, I figure there's a good chance it's God's will. And that's the direction I want to go in. I need to run that by a couple of people usually because I don't always know what's simple or what's practical or what's possible. But when I do that, I find that life is good. Recovery is strong. And a day at a time, there's hope for families of addicts and alcoholics if we share our experience, strength, and hope on a regular basis. So that's everything I know. Thanks for coming this afternoon.